What makes a brand irresistible? Not just liked, not just purchased, but the kind of brand that people follow, obsess over, and share without being asked. Here's the thing, it's not about better ads, not about louder marketing. It comes down to a handful of psychological effects that great brands use, sometimes intentionally, sometimes by accident, to make themselves unforgettable. In this video, I'm breaking down the 3 most powerful ones: the enemy effect, the mirror effect, and the villain effect. Why does this matter? Because if your brand feels stuck, if you're fighting for attention, or if your product feels like just another option, it's not because it's bad, it's because you're not using these effects. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to use these effects to make your brand irresistible, so that people don't just buy from you, they rally behind you. All right. Let's dive in. The first effect that makes brands irresistible is what we call the enemy effect. Here's the core idea. People don't just want to buy, they want to belong. And belonging doesn't come from features or discounts or clever marketing even. It comes from conflict. It comes from identifying an enemy. Because humans are tribal by nature. We rally when there's something to fight for or against. And when your brand declares an enemy, you stop being a business and start being a cause. So let's zoom in. Why does this work? Psychologically, it's because of something called common enemy intimacy. When 2 people or 2 million people share a common enemy, their bond strengthens instantly. That's why strangers can bond over hating the same sports team, the same politician, or the same airline. It's primal. So when your brand says, we're not just here to sell a product, we're here to fight this broken thing, people don't just listen, they lean in. But there is a mistake that most founders make here. They think the enemy is always their competitor, and that's wrong. It's too small, it's too petty. The best enemies are bigger. They're systems, they're outdated mindsets, they're invisible forces that frustrate your audience every single day. When you name those, your brand feels like a revolution. Let's break it down with an example. Take Tesla. Did they come out saying we're better than Toyota, we have longer range than Nissan? No. They said our enemy is fossil fuels. Our enemy is an outdated energy system that's destroying the planet. And suddenly, every Tesla wasn't just a car, it was a vote. It was a statement. It was, I'm not just driving, I'm joining a fight for the future. That's the enemy effect in action. That's the power of the enemy effect. It transforms your brand from a company to a cause. Now here's a tactical piece. Write down 3 questions. Number 1, what is broken in the world that my brand exists to fix? Number 2, what does my audience hate but can't always describe? And number 3, how does my product become the weapon to fight it? Answer those and you have your enemy. Here's the thing, when you name an enemy, you give people a reason to choose sides. And without an enemy, your brand is just another option, another product on the shelf. It's easy to ignore. But with an enemy, suddenly you're a flag people can rally around. You're the line in the sand. You're the brand that says, we're not like them and we'll prove it. That's why the enemy effect works. It transforms your brand from a nice to have into a movement. So the question isn't, what do you sell? The question is, who are you helping people fight against? Okay, the second effect is what we call the mirror effect. And this one is powerful because it taps into the most irresistible truth about human psychology. People don't buy products, they buy reflections of themselves. If the enemy effect is about giving people something to fight against, the mirror effect is about giving them something to become. And when you hold up that mirror the right way, your brand stops being just another choice and it becomes a personal identity. Here's the science. Humans are wired for self-relevance. Every single thing we process, an ad, a video, headline, a TikTok, the brain's first filter is this about me? If the answer is no, they scroll. If the answer is yes, they lean in. And here's the nuance. People don't just want to see themselves, they want to see the version of themselves that they wish they were. Not who they are today, but who they want to be tomorrow. And that's the trick. The mirror effect doesn't reflect reality, it reflects aspiration. It shows them the character they could play if only they step into your brand. Here's how to frame the mirror. When you use this effect, you're basically telling your customer, this is who you are now, this is who you could become, and this is how our brand is the bridge between the two. That's the story arc. It's not about features, it's not about specs, it's not even about benefits, it's about identity transformation. Think about it. When someone buys, they're not asking, does this work? They're asking, what does this make me? That's the story arc. And if your brand can answer that question in a way that makes them feel seen, elevated, and proud, you don't just make a sale, you've made a fan, an ambassador. You make someone who wears your logo like a badge of honor. When Gymshark blew up, it wasn't just because their clothes fit well, it was because they held up a mirror to an entire generation of young lifters. Buying a Gymshark hoodie wasn't about fabric, it was about tribe. It was a mirror saying, you're not just another gym goer, you're an athlete, you're part of this movement. That's why people wore it proudly, even outside the gym, because it wasn't clothing, it was identity armor. Now let's zoom out. The mirror effect works because people crave belonging. The second someone can point at your brand and say, this is me, you've won. It's sticky because walking away from your product doesn't mean just switching to a competitor. It means giving up a piece of themselves at that point. That's the magic. When your brand is just a tool, people drop it when something cheaper comes along. But when your brand is a mirror, people defend it like it's personal. They'll argue with strangers online. They'll tattoo your logo. They'll line up in the cold at 4 a.m. just to say, I was first. It's not rational, but it's identity. So how do you build this into your brand? Well, number one, you got to define that identity. Ask yourself, what's the better version of my customer? What do they want to see in themselves? Number two is make that bridge clear. Show how your product doesn't just solve a problem, but it transforms them. Number three, repeat the reflection. Every ad, every story, every product drop, it should whisper, this is who you are when you're with us. So that's the mirror effect, not just a tactic, not just marketing, it's how you turn a product into a persona and a brand into a badge. Finally, if you want your brand to be irresistible, it needs a villain, not a feature, not a discount, not a we're better than them pitch, a villain. Because here's the truth, without a villain, your story has no heartbeat. Think about it. The Joker makes Batman legendary. Voldemort makes Harry Potter unforgettable. Thanos makes the Avengers more than just another action flick. Every great story has a villain, and every irresistible brand does too. The villain is the spark that makes your brand feel alive. It gives people a reason not just to notice you, but to root for you. So let's break down why do villains make brands irresistible. This is the psychology. The human brain craves characters. We don't remember abstract ideas, but we remember faces, we remember personalities, we remember stories with flesh and blood. If I tell you this brand fights inefficiency, it floats past your brain like a passing cloud. But if I tell you this brand fights the overbuilder, the bloated figure who piles on features that no one even asked for, suddenly you've got an image, a mental movie. That's called the picture superiority effect. Our brains are wired to lock onto images much faster than abstract words. And villains are just that, walking, talking images. Here's the punchline. Enemies are ideas, villains are characters, and characters stick. And that stickiness, that's how brands go from being products people try to stories that people tell. Now, how do you actually create a villain for your brand? Well, step one is to exaggerate. Villains aren't realistic. They're dramatic, bigger than life, louder, meaner, greedier than reality. And that's what makes them memorable. If your frustration is slow service, your villain is the sloth clerk who never looks up from the counter. Step two is to visualize. Villains don't live in spreadsheets, they live in stories. Give them a name, a tone, a look, maybe even a recurring phrase. The clearer the picture, the stronger the memory. Step three is to repeat. A villain can't just appear once. The strongest brands bring their villain into every story. They show how the villain behaves, what damage it causes, and then they position themselves as the answer. Here's the rhythm. The villain creates the tension, therefore your brand provides the release. That cycle, it's addictive. It keeps audiences locked in. So where do you actually use villains? Well, in your messaging, instead of saying, our app is simple to use, say, we built this to destroy the overcomplicator, the one who makes everything harder than it has to be. Or in your ads, visual hooks matter. Imagine an ad that doesn't start with a product shot, but with a villain in action, a lazy guru giving bad advice, a sneaky marketer upselling junk, or a clunky operator wasting your time. The second people see the villain, they lean in. Also in your community, villains give people a cause. They give fans something to rally against. That's why when people share your content, they don't just say this is a great product. They say this fights the villain that I hate too. The villain isn't decoration. It's the backbone of your story. So let's tie it back. Why does the villain effect make a brand irresistible? Well, because villains transform your brand from a tool into a tale. Tools are useful, but tales are unforgettable. Tools get used, tales get shared. And here's the punchline. People don't just want solutions. People want stories, and stories need villains. Without a villain, your product is an option. But with a villain, your product is a mission. So here's the takeaway. Your brand needs a villain. Not because it's edgy, not because it's fun, but because it's human. Villains make problems personal. They make stories dramatic, and they make brands irresistible. When you craft your villain right, you don't just give people a reason to buy, you give them a reason to believe. That's the difference between being another brand in the market and being the brand that people can't stop talking about. Because features fade, campaigns end, competitors rise. But villains live rent-free in every audience's head. And the brand that slays them, that's the brand that they'll never forget. Alright, so that's it. That's the 3 effects. Enemy, mirror, and villain. Put them together, and suddenly your brand isn't just competing, it's leading. People don't fall in love with products. They fall in love with stories, tribes, and reflections of themselves. The enemy effect gives them a fight, the mirror effect gives them identity, and the villain effect gives them a storyline. That's the formula for making your brand irresistible.